September 14, 1941. RAF Binbrook, Lincolnshire. The rain didn't fall. It hung in the air, a cold, miserable mist that soaked through wool and leather and settled directly into the marrow of your bones. Sergeant Arthur Artie Penhaligon stood under the dripping wing of the Iron Duchess, a Vickers Wellington bomber that looked less like a machine of war and more like a weary beast of burden. She smelled of high-octane fuel, wet canvas, and the sharp, metallic tang of oil. To Artie, it was the smell of home, and the smell of death. "She's coughing on the starboard radial, Artie," the pilot, Flight Lieutenant David Skipper Moore, said, walking up behind him. Moore was 23 but looked 40 around the eyes. He held a lit cigarette shielded in his cupped hand. "Sounded rough on the run-up." Artie wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag that was already black. "It's the mixture control, Skip. The linkage gets stiff in this damp. I've greased it. She'll sing for you tonight. Just don't push the boost past +4 until we clear the coast. We're carrying a full load," Moore muttered, looking at the 4,000-pound cookie bomb being winched into the belly. "+4 might not get us off the grass." "She'll fly," Artie said, patting the fuselage. The Wellington wasn't built of solid metal like the American fortresses. It was a geodetic skeleton, a basket weave of duralium and metal covered in doped fabric. It was strong, flexible, and flammable. "She always flies." The briefing room was a sea of blue uniforms and cigarette smoke. The station commander pulled back the curtain covering the map. A collective groan went through the room, low and vibration-heavy, like a distant engine starting. The red ribbon stretched from England, across the North Sea, deep into the heart of the Ruhr Valley. "Target for tonight is the rail yards at Munster," the commander announced. "Intelligence reports heavy movement of troop trains heading for the Eastern Front. We are to disrupt the line." Münster, Happy Valley, Flax City. Artie looked at his hands. They were shaking slightly. He put them under the table. He wasn't afraid of dying, not exactly. He was afraid of the fire. Every airman was. In a Wellington, surrounded by fuel tanks and fabric, you were essentially flying inside a lit match. "Weather is expected to clear over the target," the Met officer lied. They always lied. "Heavy flak concentrations here, and here. Night fighters are active near the coast." Artie tuned it out. He was doing the mental math of fuel consumption. Munster and back. 7 hours. 1,200 gallons. If we lose an engine, we swim. The takeoff. 2,200 hours. The inside of the Wellington was a cramped, dark tunnel. Artie sat in the folding seat on the starboard side, next to the pilot. The roar of the two massive Bristol Pegasus engines was deafening. It wasn't just noise. It was a physical pressure that rattled your teeth. "Climbing power," Moore said over the intercom. His voice was tinny, scratching through the static. Artie adjusted the levers. He watched the needles on the dials. Oil pressure, good. Cylinder head temp, rising. The bomber lumbered down the wet grass strip. Felt heavy, sluggish. The bomb load was dragging them down. The end of the runway and the hedgerow beyond was rushing toward them. "Come on, old girl," Artie whispered. "Lift your skirts." With a groan of protesting metal, the Iron Duchess unstuck from the earth. They cleared the trees by feet. They climbed into the black void. The long wait. 3 hours of boredom. 3 hours of freezing cold. The heating system in a Wellington was a joke. At 12,000 feet, the temperature inside the fuselage dropped to -20. Artie's breath plumed in front of him. Ice formed on the inside of the plexiglass. He checked his instruments every 2 minutes. It was a ritual. Prayer. Port engine. Sweet. Starboard engine. Running a little hot, but steady. Hydraulics. Green. Navigator to pilot. Max Scottish brogue cut through the silence. Coast coming up. Prepare for the reception committee. Ahead, the darkness was suddenly punctuated by searchlights. Blue-white beams, stiff and unbending, probing the sky like the fingers of a blind giant. And then the flak. It didn't look like explosions from up here. It looked like camera flashes. Pop, pop, pop. But then the sound reached them. A dull, heavy crump that shook the airframe. Steer 090, Mac ordered. We're drifting. Flak is getting heavy, Moore said, his hands wrestling the control yoke. Clang. Something hit the fuselage. It sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. Shrapnel. Damage report? Moore asked. Rear gunner okay? Came the voice of Jimmy, the 18-year-old in the tail turret. He sounded terrified. Just a scratch on the perspex. Steady, boys, Artie said, leaning forward to fine-tune the throttles. We're almost at the drop. The drop. The bombing run was the longest 2 minutes of Artie's life. To drop the bombs accurately, they had to fly straight and level. No dying. No weaving. Just sitting there, a fat, slow moth in a room full of candles. Bomb doors open, Moore said. The wind howled as the belly of the plane opened. Left. Left. Steady. The bomb aimer lay prone in the nose. Steady. The flak was intense now. Black puffs of smoke appeared magically off the wingtips. The plane bucked and lurched. Bombs gone. The plane leaped upward, relieved of the weight. Camera running. Got the flash. Let's get the hell out of here, the aimer yelled. Turning for home. Moore banked the plane hard to the left, diving to gain speed. They had survived the target. Now they just had to survive the hunters. The shadow. They were over the Dutch coast, thinking they were safe when it happened. Bogey. 6 o'clock low. Jimmy screamed from the rear turret. Artie didn't see the fighter, but he felt it. A Messerschmitt Bf 110 night fighter, equipped with upward-firing cannons, Schragemusik, had stalked them from below. The darkness erupted. Trace rounds, green and yellow, tore through the floor of the Wellington. They ripped through the fabric, smashed into the radio set, and shredded the hydraulic lines. Thwack, 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 thwack. It sounded like a sewing machine from hell. Jimmy, return fire, Moore yelled. I can't depress the guns low enough. He's underneath us. The fighter pulled up, raking the starboard wing as it passed. Artie saw the sparks. He saw the metal skin of the engine cowling peel back like a banana. And then, with a whoosh that he could hear even over the engines, the world turned orange. The fire. Fire! Starboard engine! Artie shouted, his eyes glued to the small window. A jet of flame was spewing from the back of the engine nacelle. It wasn't just a flicker. It was a torch. The fuel line had been severed. High-octane petrol was pumping directly onto the red-hot exhaust manifold.
Featering starboard prop.
Moore slammed the lever back. The massive propeller slowed and stopped, the blades turning edge-on to the wind to reduce drag. Fire extinguisher activated. Artie punched the red button. They waited. Usually, the Gravener extinguisher system would smother the engine in foam and the fire would die. They watched the wing. The flames didn't die. They grew. The fire wasn't inside the engine anymore. The severed fuel pipe was spraying petrol backwards, across the top of the wing structure. The fabric skin of the wing, the doped linen, was catching fire. It's not going out, Skip, Artie yelled. The pipe is fractured behind the firewall. The fire was aggressive. It was eating the fabric, revealing the geodetic aluminum skeleton underneath. If the fire burned through the main spar, the wing would snap off. Mac, give me a course to the nearest land, Moore said, his voice tight. We're over the Zuider Z, Mac replied. Nearest land is enemy territory, 40 miles back. We can't go back, Moore said. The fighter is still there. If we bail out here, we freeze in 10 minutes, Artie said. He knew the stats. The North Sea in September was a death sentence. The plane lurched. The fire was disrupting the airflow over the wing. They were losing altitude. Jimmy, get your chute on, Moore ordered. We might have to ditch. Artie looked at the fire. It was about 3 feet out from the fuselage, a raging inferno sitting right on top of the fuel tanks. He looked at the pilot. Moore was wrestling the controls, sweat pouring down his face, trying to keep the plane from flipping over into a death spiral. He looked at the canvas wall of the fuselage. Skip, Artie said. His voice was strangely calm. What? I can get to it. Moore looked at him like he was insane. Get to what? The fire. It's the feed pipe. If I can smother the leak, the slipstream will blow the rest out. You can't get to the engine, Artie. It's on the bloody wing. Outside. I can climb out, Artie said. He stood up. He wasn't thinking about the absurdity of it. He was thinking about the mechanics. There's the astrohatch. I can climb along the fuselage, drop down to the wing root, and crawl out. At 10,000 feet, doing 120 knots, you'll be blown off before you get your foot out the hole. If I don't, the wing burns off in 5 minutes and we all die, Artie said. I'd rather fall than burn. Moore looked at the starboard wing. The geodetic cross members were glowing cherry red. The structure was failing. Go, Moore whispered. Mac, give him the rope, the preparation. It was madness. It was suicide. Mac, the navigator, grabbed the coil of heavy hemp rope used for securing cargo. He tied a bowline knot around Artie's chest, cinching it tight under his armpits. I'll anchor it to the main spar inside the fuselage, Mac said. His face was pale. Artie, man, you're daft. Just keep the tension tight, Artie said. He looked around for something to smother the fire with. He grabbed a heavy canvas engine cover from the locker. He moved to the side of the fuselage just above the wing. The Wellington didn't have a door there, but it had the geodetic frame. Give me the axe, Artie said. He took the crash axe and swung it at the side of the plane. The fabric tore. He hacked at the skin of the bomber, punching a hole through the wall. The wind screamed in. It was like a physical blow. The noise rose to a shriek. Artie looked out. The wing was a landscape of terror. The wind was a hurricane. The fire was a dragon. He looked back at Moore. Keep her steady, Skip. For God's sake, don't bank. I'll hold her level if it kills me, Moore promised. Artie took a breath. He put one leg out into the void. The slipstream grabbed his boot and tried to rip his leg off at the hip. The cold was instant and shocking, piercing his flight suit like needles. He pushed his head out. The wind forced his eyelids shut. He had to squint through the tiniest slit. He was outside. Below him, 10,000 feet of nothing. Just black ocean and death. Beside him, a roaring fire. He gripped the jagged metal edge of the hole he had cut. He pulled his other leg out. He was standing on the wing root. The wind speed was 120 miles per hour. It hit him in the chest, pinning him against the fuselage. If he moved an inch away from the body of the plane, the wind would catch him and fling him into the propeller of the tail, or just out into the night. He looked at the fire. It was 6 feet away. To reach it, he had to let go of the fuselage. He had to crawl along the wing, holding onto nothing but the diamond-shaped holes in the geodetic framework, while the wind tried to kill him and the fire tried to cook him. He looked at the rope tied around his chest. It looked very thin. Right? Artie whispered into the gale. Let's fix this bloody engine. He let go of the fuselage and reached for the first handhold on the burning wing. 10,000 feet over the North Sea. The wind did not feel like air. At 120 miles per hour, air ceases to be a gas and becomes a solid. It felt like Artie had stepped into a rushing river of concrete. He was pinned against the fuselage. The roar was absolute. It erased the world. There was no engine sound, no shouting, no thought. Only the screaming white noise of the slipstream tearing at his flight suit, trying to peel him off the metal skin of the bomber. Artie gasped, sucking in air that was too fast to breathe. It forced its way into his lungs, freezing them instantly. He looked to his right. The fire was a living thing. It danced violently on the wing, whipped into a frenzy by the gale. It was only 6 feet away. On the ground, 6 feet is 2 steps. Up here, it was a journey across a razor blade. He looked down. He shouldn't have looked down. Through the gaps in the burning fabric, through the lattice of the geodetic aluminum frame, he saw the ocean. It was a black abyss, broken only by the occasional white crest of a wave. If he fell, he would have time to think about it. He would fall for a long time. Move, his brain screamed. Move or burn. The lattice ladder. Artie took his right hand off the jagged edge of the fuselage hole. The wind instantly slapped his arm back, pinning it against the side of the plane. He had to use all his strength just to peel his arm off the metal and reach forward. The Wellington's wing was unique. It wasn't a smooth sheet of metal. Under the fabric skin, it was a basket weave of metal beams, a geodetic structure designed to be light and strong. The fire had burned away a patch of the fabric near the fuselage. That was his ladder. Artie punched his gloved fist through the charred, brittle linen. His hand closed around a cold duralumin strut. He pulled. He swung his body away from the safety of the fuselage. Now he was entirely at the mercy of the wind. It hit him broadside. It felt like a giant invisible hand grabbed his chest and shoved. His boots scrambled on the slippery, doped fabric of the wing root. There was no grip. Kick. He kicked his boot heel down hard. Punched through the fabric. He hooked his toe under a metal crossbrace. One foothold. One handhold. He was on the wing. The balancing act. Inside the cockpit, Flight Lieutenant Moore was fighting a battle of his own. The weight of Artie on the wing upset the delicate aerodynamic balance. The plane wanted to roll to the right, to dip that burning wing into the sea. Moore had the control yoke turned almost 90 degrees to the left, his legs shaking as he stomped on the rudder pedal. "Steady," Moore grunted through gritted teeth. "Don't shake him off." Mac, the navigator, was paying out the rope. He watched it snake out through the jagged hole in the fuselage. It was taut, vibrating like a violin string. "He's moving," Mac whispered. "The crazy bastard is moving. The fire and the ice." Artie crawled. He didn't walk. Walking was impossible. He lay flat against the curve of the wing, hugging the metal skeleton like a lover. Be in. Left hand forward. Find a strut. Grip until the knuckles turn white. Right hand forward. Punch through the fabric. Grip. Slide the body. Right foot forward. Kick. Hook. The wind screamed. Tore his goggles away from his face, the strap snapping. They vanished into the dark instantly. Now the freezing wind battered his naked eyes. Tears streamed back toward his ears, freezing on his cheeks. He was halfway there. The heat hit him. It was a bizarre sensation. The front of his face, his chest, and his right arm were being seared by the flames. His back, his legs, and his left side were being frozen by the sub-zero airstream. He was burning and freezing at the same time. He could see the source now. The engine cowling had been peeled back by the cannon shell. Inside, the copper fuel feed pipe was severed. A fountain of petrol was spraying out, vaporizing instantly in the heat of the exhaust manifold. The flame was a blue-white torch, anchoring itself to the airflow. It was eating the wing spar. If that spar melted, the wing would fold up, and the Iron Duchess would become a falling brick. Artie reached into his flight jacket. His fingers were numb blocks of wood. He fumbled for the canvas engine cover he had stuffed in there. He pulled it out. The mistake. The moment the canvas left his jacket, the wind caught it. It snapped open like a parachute. The force was explosive. It jerked Artie's arm back. He lost his grip with his left hand. "No!" His body was lifted off the wing. The wind got underneath him. He was a kite. For a terrifying second, he was airborne, held only by his right boot hooked under a metal brace and his right hand clutching a strut. He flapped in the slipstream, his legs kicking wildly at the nothingness below. The rope around his chest snapped tight. It dug into his ribs, bruising the bone. Inside the plane, Mac was slammed against the fuselage frame as the rope yanked him. "I've got him! I've got him!" Mac screamed, wrapping the rope around a metal stanchion. Artie hung off the trailing edge of the wing. He was looking straight down at the whitecaps of the North Sea. "Pull!" He roared the word, though no one could hear it. He summoned every ounce of adrenaline, every ounce of fear. He hauled himself back up. His muscles screamed. He dragged his chest back onto the curve of the wing. He hooked his left leg. He slammed his body flat. He was still holding the canvas cover. He hadn't let go. The fix. He was at the engine now. The propeller was feathered. The blades were stationary, standing like dark sentinels. but the heat was intense. His eyebrows were singeing. The smell of burning rubber and petrol was choking him. He saw the hole in the cowling. He bunched the canvas cover into a ball. He had to be precise. If he missed, the wind would take the canvas and feed it to the prop, or blow it away forever. He waited for a lull in the turbulence. There was no lull. Just do it. He lunged forward. He jammed the ball of heavy canvas into the gaping hole in the engine cowling. He shoved his hand in after it, pushing the fabric deep into the metal wound. He felt the jagged metal slice his glove, cutting his palm. He didn't care. He pushed until he touched the hot metal of the engine block. He wedged the canvas tight against the fractured pipe. He held it there. 1 second. The flames flickered. 2 seconds. The fuel spray was blocked. The source was cut off. 3 seconds. The wind, which had been his enemy, suddenly became his friend. Without the constant spray of fresh petrol, the 120 miles per hour gale blew the remaining fire out. The blue torch vanished. The red glow of the burning fabric died down, leaving only sparks and black smoke. Darkness returned to the wing. Artie lay there, his hand still jammed inside the engine, his cheek pressed against the vibrating metal of the wing. He was gasping, sobbing dry, heaving breaths. It was out. The return journey. Fire is out. Jimmy yelled from the rear turret. He did it. The crazy bastard did it. Artie. Moore called over the intercom, forgetting Artie couldn't hear him. Mac. Bring him in. Getting out had been driven by adrenaline. Getting back was driven by nothing. Artie was empty. His energy was gone. His hands were frozen into claws. He pulled his hand out of the engine. The canvas plug stayed in place, wedged tight by the pressure. He turned around. The fuselage looked a mile away. He began the crawl back. It was slower this time. His body was stiff. The cold had seeped into his joints. He slipped twice. Both times, he didn't even panic. He just hung there numbly until he found a foothold again. He reached the hole in the fuselage. Strong hands grabbed his flight suit. Mac hauled him in like a sack of potatoes. Artie tumbled onto the floor of the plane, collapsing onto the metal grating. The wind howled through the open hole, filling the plane with noise, but Artie didn't care. He was inside. Mac slammed a temporary patch, a piece of plywood, over the hole and braced it. The noise dampened slightly. Mac knelt beside him. He shone a torch in Artie's face. Artie's face was a mask of soot, blood, and ice. His eyebrows were gone. His skin was red and blistered on one side, white and frostbitten on the other. "You all right, Artie?" Mac yelled. Artie tried to speak. His jaw was frozen. He held up a thumb. It was shaking uncontrollably. The new reality. Artie lay there for 10 minutes, thawing out. The pain of the blood returning to his limbs was worse than the freezing. It felt like his veins were filled with broken glass. He dragged himself up. He sat in his co-pilot seat. He put his headset back on. "Losing altitude," Moore was saying. "Status? Skip." Artie croaked. His voice sounded like gravel. Moore looked at him. The pilot's eyes were wide with disbelief, but he quickly snapped back to professionalism. "Good to have you back, Artie. Fire's out. But we have a problem." "Fuel?" Artie asked. "Fuel is low, but we might make the coast. The problem is the hydraulics." Artie looked at the gauges. The hydraulic pressure was at 0. The fire and the fighter bullets had severed the lines. "That means no flaps," Artie said. "And no landing gear." "We can crank the gear down manually," Moore said. "There's the emergency hand pump." "I'll check it," Artie said. He unbuckled and crawled back to the hydraulic reservoir behind the spar. He checked the emergency lines. He came back. He looked grim. "The lines are cut. Skip. The fluid is gone. We can't pump the gear down. It's dead weight." Moore stared at the darkness ahead. "So we have no wheels. No flaps to slow us down. One engine out. And a hole in the side of the plane. And we're carrying a 4,000-pound bomb bay that's empty. So we're light," Mac added unhelpfully. "We'll bounce." "We can't ditch in the sea," Moore said. Not with the damage to the fuselage. We'd break up on impact. We have to belly land, Artie said. On the grass. At Binbrook. Belly landing a Wellington is tricky, Moore said. But with one engine. If I get the speed wrong, we cartwheel. Artie looked at the starboard wing. Through the window, he could see the charred skeleton. The fabric was gone from a large section. The geodetic metal was black and twisted. Skip, Artie said softly. Look at the wing. Moore looked. The main spar took a beating from the heat. It's warped. So, Artie said. If we hit the ground hard, that wing is going to snap off, and the fuel tank inside it is going to rupture, and we're going to be a fireball. Moore tightened his grip on the yoke. We don't have a choice, Artie. We're going in. The radio crackled. Binbrook Tower to Iron Duchess. You are clear to land. Emergency vehicles are standing by. Good luck, boys. Ahead, in the distance, the faint lights of the airfield appeared. They looked like a necklace of diamonds in the black velvet of the night. To Artie, they looked like target markers. Gear up, landing check, Moore announced. Crew, brace for impact. This is going to be rough. Artie tightened his harness. He looked at his raw, bleeding hands. He had walked on the wing to stop a fire. Now he had to ride the fire down to the ground. RAF Binbrook. 3:15 hours. The runway lights were a blur of wet amber streaking past the plexiglass. Speed. Moore barked, wrestling with the control yoke. His forearms were bulging, veins popping as he fought the torque of the single running engine. The plane wanted to roll left into the dead engine into the ground. 110 knots, Artie called out. His voice was steady, mechanical. Too fast, Skip. We're coming in hot. I can't slow her down, Moore yelled. Without flaps, she stalls at 90. If I cut the throttle now, we drop like a stone. The ground was rushing up. The wet grass of the airfield perimeter reflected the landing lights like a black mirror. Brace! 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 Artie screamed over the intercom. He jammed his feet against the bulkhead. He wrapped his arms around his head. He closed his eyes. He imagined the damaged starboard wing, the heat-warped spar, the fragile aluminum bones holding tons of fuel. Hold together, he prayed, just for 10 more seconds. The impact. They didn't touch down. They slammed. The belly of the Iron Duchess hit the turf at 100 miles per hour. Crunch. It wasn't a thud. It was the sound of the world ending. The noise was deafening. A high-pitched shriek of tearing metal as the bomb bay doors were ripped off. The floor of the cockpit buckled upward. Artie was thrown forward against his harness, the straps cutting into his bruised chest. Engine cut. Moore screamed, killing the ignition to the port engine. The bomber was a sled now. It slid across the wet grass, throwing up a tsunami of mud and sparks behind it. The vibration was so violent Artie's vision blurred into gray static. They were slowing down. 80 knots. 60 knots. Then it happened. The starboard wing, weakened by the fire and the stress of the impact, finally gave up. Snap. The main spar sheared. The wing folded upward like a bird with a broken bone. The tip dug into the soft earth. The plane pivoted. The slide turned into a violent spin. The fuselage whipped around 180 degrees. The tail section slammed sideways into the ground. Artie was thrown sideways, his helmet smashing against the side window. Glass shattered. Mud sprayed into the cockpit. Then silence. The escape. For a second, there was no sound. No wind. No engine. Just the ticking of cooling metal and the hiss of steam. Then the smell hit them. Fuel. Raw, high-octane aviation fuel. The tank in the broken wing had ruptured. Out. Moore screamed. Everybody out. She's gonna blow. Artie fumbled with his harness release. His fingers were stiff claws. Click. He fell out of his seat onto the buckled floor. Mac! Jimmy! Artie yelled.
I'm okay.
Mac shouted from the navigator station. Jimmy's trapped in the turret. The doors are jammed. Artie scrambled back through the fuselage. The plane was tilted at a crazy angle. It was dark, smelling of petrol and fear. He reached the rear. The tail section was twisted. Jimmy was banging on the glass of the rear turret. "Get me out! Get me out!" "Mac, grab the crash axe," Artie yelled. Mac appeared, face bleeding from a cut on his forehead, holding the red axe. He swung it at the fuselage skin next to the turret door. Clang, clang. They tore a hole in the aluminum. They grabbed Jimmy by his flight jacket and hauled him through. The kid was sobbing, shaking uncontrollably. "Move! Move!" They scrambled toward the astrohatch, the same hole Artie had climbed out of earlier. They dropped onto the wet grass. "Run!" Moore ordered. "Get away from the plane!" They ran. They stumbled through the mud, their heavy flight boots sinking deep. They ran until their lungs burned. They dove behind a small earthen berm near the perimeter fence. They waited for the explosion. They watched the wreck of the Iron Duchess. She lay broken in the field, her back broken, her wings severed. Vapors shimmered in the air around her. The fire trucks were roaring across the field, sirens wailing. But the explosion never came. The fuel had spilled onto the wet grass, but there was no spark. The fire Artie had fought so hard to extinguish on the wing had stayed dead. The Duchess had died, but she hadn't taken them with her. The aftermath. Artie lay on his back in the mud, staring up at the rain. Felt good. Felt clean. A medic was kneeling over him. "Can you hear me, Sergeant? Let me see those hands." Artie held up his hands. They were a mess, covered in burns, cuts, and soot. The medic hissed in sympathy. "We're getting you to the infirmary, son. You're in shock." "I'm fine," Artie whispered. "I'm fine." Flight Lieutenant Moore walked over. He looked like a ghost, face pale, oil-stained. He looked down at Artie. "You crazy bastard," Moore said softly. There was no anger, only awe. "You actually went out there. Someone had to plug the hole, Skip?" Artie managed a weak grin. "You saved us, Artie," Max said, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "We were dead. You saved us." Epilogue. The Canvas Coffin. October 1941. Buckingham Palace. The room was grand. Gold leaf, red velvet, and men in uniforms with more medals than chest space. Sergeant Arthur Penhaligon stood at attention. His hands were bandaged. He wore a fresh uniform that felt stiff and uncomfortable. King George VI stood before him. The king looked tired, but his eyes were kind. He pinned the Bronze Cross onto Artie's chest. The Victoria Cross, the highest award for valor in the British Empire. "For most conspicuous bravery," the citation read. "Climbing onto the wing of an aircraft in flight, to extinguish a fire, saving the crew." The king shook Artie's hand, gently, mindful of the bandages. "They tell me you walked on the wing, Sergeant," the king said. "I crawled, Your Majesty," Artie replied. "Walking would have been showing off." The king smiled. November 1945. A pub in Lincolnshire. The war was over. The bombers were being scrapped, turned into pots and pans. Artie sat in the corner of the Eagle and Child, nursing a pint of bitter. He didn't fly anymore. His hands still hurt when the weather turned cold. A group of young pilots were at the bar, loud, boasting about the new jet fighters. "Wellingtons?" One of them laughed. "Those old canvas coffins? I heard if you poked them with a stick, they'd fall apart." Artie looked at his pint. He traced the condensation on the glass. He remembered the wind. He remembered the fire. He remembered the feeling of the geodetic frame under his boot and the abyss below. He remembered the Iron Duchess. She wasn't a coffin. She was a fortress built of fabric and faith. And on one night, in the freezing dark above the North Sea, she had held together just long enough. Artie finished his drink, put on his coat, and walked out into the rain. He didn't need to tell them. The medal in his drawer back home said enough. He was the wing walker, and he was alive. The end.